Hi everybody, this is Humaira, and for today's video we are going to be talking about the middle class in South Africa, which I think is such an important topic because as we all know, the middle class is under so much of pressure at the moment. So I'm just loading up my PowerPoint slides and then I will definitely be getting into this further. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so the middle class in South Africa generally refers to households with a monthly income between 5,000 and 30,000 rand a month, right? So, and that's quite a big variation. So I guess most of us are deemed in the middle class. And as you hear all the time about just how expensive things are getting and how little money there is left over at the end of the month. So I really do want to talk about the economic reality behind the middle class and what's really going on. So some definitions do suggest that between 8,000 to 22,000 would be the middle class and is more accurate for entry. So like I said, I'm just giving you a basic definition so that we know what we are speaking about, right? Now, the middle class is a group that can afford basic needs and some comforts, but is highly vulnerable to debt, with many experiencing financial strain. So the key characteristics and estimates, the income range, like I said, estimates vary, but commonly cited figures are between 5,000 to as high as 40,000, and it depends on the household size as well as the location. The lifestyle would typically include residing in suburban, middle income areas, owning a car and having access to services, but often living paycheck to paycheck. Now, the vulnerability element or characteristic is that many in this bracket are troubled middle class with high debt to income ratios, making them susceptible to economic shocks. Now, research identifies a lower middle class between 5,000 to 10,000 a month and an upper middle class between 22 to 30,000 rand a month, showing a wide spectrum of lifestyle. Right. So the definition is very highly debated due to the high inequality, with some researchers suggesting that simply using income to define the class is insufficient, right? As we've just said, there's other characteristics as to where do you live and the vulnerability of that element. So before we start, I just want to ask you something. Have you noticed that even when your salary increases, life in South Africa somehow still feels more expensive? Groceries are higher, electricity is higher, medical aid goes up every year, and yet many professionals and business owners feel like they are working harder, but not getting ahead. And that is not just perception. South Africa's middle class is under serious pressure economically and structurally. And today I want to unpack why this is happening and what it means for the future of the country. So hi everybody, I am Humaira from HM Accounting. Let's get into it. Now, there are some of the structural pressures on the middle class that we're going to be going through, all six of them in more detail in the following slides, as well as some solutions on a country level as well as on an individual level, because as you know, I do not like to give you unactionable information or advice unless there is something that we can sort of do about it. So the middle class, firstly, number one, carries a disproportionate tax burden. That is the first thing affecting the middle class. The first pressure point, like I said, it is around taxation. South Africa has one of the most concentrated tax bases in the world. And according to data from SARS and from National Treasury, roughly 7 million South Africans pay personal income tax, but less than 1 million taxpayers contribute the majority of that income tax revenue. And within that group, a relatively small portion of higher income taxpayers contribute the majority of the country's income tax revenue. So most of those taxpayers fall squarely into what we would call the middle and the upper middle class. And these numbers show that a small segment of the population is carrying a very large share of the tax system. And at the same time, government spending commitments continue to grow. So South Africa's gross government debt is approaching 79% of GDP. And while Treasury has indicated that debt may stabilize, servicing that debt consumes a large portion of the national budget. Now, what does this mean in practical, simple terms? It means that government has limited room to reduce taxes on taxpayers. So the middle class continues carrying a large share of that fiscal burden through personal income tax, through VAT, through fuel levies, and through indirect taxes embedded in everyday goods and services. And because wages often rise slower than inflation, many people experience what economists or economists call the bracket creep, where tax thresholds do not keep up with income adjustments. And the result is that even when you earn slightly more, you take home less real purchasing power. So here's something that's now really going to put this all into perspective. Is going to be the second major pressure point is our cost of living. So inflation in South Africa has generally remained within the Reserve Bank's target range of 3% to 6%. But that doesn't tell the full story because household inflation is different from headline inflation. Sorry, I lost where I was. Okay. So the biggest cost drivers for the middle class households include things like food, electricity, fuel, education, insurance, home financing, and many of these categories have been rising faster than the overall inflation rate. And since around 2008, electricity tariffs in South Africa have increased over 400%. And because electricity is an input into almost everything from manufacturing to transport to food production, those increases eventually filter through the broader cost of living. So fuel prices fluctuate based on global markets and exchange rates, as we are currently seeing with the Iran-Israel-US war. Private school fees and medical aid contributions continue to rise each year. So even when inflation appears controlled, the real cost of maintaining a middle-class lifestyle continues to increase. And for many households, that means that income growth is simply not keeping pace with expenses. Now, the private provision problem. This would be the problem number 3. Another structural challenge facing the middle class in South Africa is something economists often call private provision of public services. And in many developed economies, taxpayers fund public systems that function reasonably well, right? But in South Africa, many middle class households effectively pay twice. And really think about this. They pay taxes, and these taxes are supposedly supposed to go to a lot of the benefit of the country that we're living in. And that means having schools available that are well kept, having roads available, parks available. But what happens is that households are paying twice in a sense of they're paying those taxes for these services, but then they also pay privately for services because they cannot rely on it publicly. These would be things like private security, public health care, or private healthcare, private education, backup electricity systems, water storage solutions. Now, these costs are not optional luxuries for many households. They are risk management expenses, and they significantly increase the financial pressure on the middle class. Number 4 is our household debt is still very high, right? This is a very important factor that increases financial pressure in household debt. According to the South African Reserve Bank, household debt levels are sitting at around 60 to 65% of disposable income. Now, what that means is that a large portion of people's earnings go towards servicing past purchases. Things like home loans, vehicle finance, and credit facilities, as well as, for example, you buy your clothes today on a store account and you're paying for it later. You can do the same with furniture. You can do that for just about anything nowadays. So when interest rates rise, this pressure is increased even further because that means that your repayments become even higher. And that leaves less room for savings, for investments, or for any financial resilience. Now, common liabilities include home loans, vehicle finance, credit cards, and personal loans. Now, even though interest rates have stabilized somewhat recently, the rate hikes over the last few years increased repayment pressure on many households. So higher interest rates means higher bond repayments, higher vehicle installments, higher credit servicing costs. So a large portion of income goes towards servicing past purchases, leaving less room for savings and investments. The fifth problem is economic growth has been slow. Now, one of the deeper structural issues is that South Africa's economy has simply not been growing fast enough. Over the past decade, economic growth has averaged around 1 to 1.5% per year. But many economists believe to significantly reduce unemployment and expand the middle class, the country needs growth closer to 4 or even 5% annually. And the gap between where we are and where we need to be has real consequences for job creation, for wages, for opportunities. Low growth affects the middle class in multiple ways because it means that there are fewer job opportunities. It means that your salary will increase even slower. It means that there's weaker businesses expanding or not many businesses expanding. And it means that there's reduced upward mobility. And in a high growth economy, people can move up economically. But when growth is slow, the middle class often feels like it is running harder just to stay in the same place. The sixth problem is regarding small businesses, and they are a key middle class path, but they are under strain. So in South Africa, entrepreneurship has traditionally been a pathway into the middle class. But small businesses face growing challenges, and these include things like compliance costs, load shedding impacts, access to funding, regulatory compliance, and rising operational expenses. And many small business owners who form a large part of the middle class are operating in an environment where their gross margins or their net margins are very low, and uncertainty in this environment is very high. And yet these businesses are so crucial because small and medium enterprises are responsible for a large share of job creation. If small businesses struggle, then the middle class feels that impact. Now, why is it that the middle class matters more than people realize? The middle class plays a very crucial role in the economy because it drives consumption. It is a major contributor to tax revenue. It supports entrepreneurship. There are professional services, and they drive investment and economic stability. So when the middle class grows, economies become more stable. When it reduces or when it starts to struggle, then the consequences ripple through society because reduced spending affects businesses, lower investment slows economic activity, and financial stress increases social pressure. So what solutions are worth looking into? And that is the big question. If the middle class is under pressure, what can actually be done about it, right? So some of the solutions need to happen at a policy and at an economic level, but there are also things that individuals and businesses can start thinking about now. And so we will look at both. One is economic growth must become a national priority. One of the most important long-term solutions is sustainable economic growth. When economies grow faster, more businesses are created, more jobs are created, wages increase, and the tax base expands. And this is important because South Africa currently has a very small tax base, as we spoke of earlier, but it supports a very large population. And if the economy grows and more people move into employment and entrepreneurship, then that tax burden becomes more evenly distributed. Now, growth requires things like reliable infrastructure, policy certainty, investment in industries with global demand. Things at the moment would be technology, AI, anything that would help the environment. So those are the types of environments that that the government should be investing in, and to some degree does. And then also support for innovation and entrepreneurship. Now, remember, without growth, the pressure on the middle class is very, very difficult to reduce. The second thing is supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs. Small businesses are one of the most important pathways into the middle class, as I've said, but they often struggle, like I said, with complex compliance requirements, limited access to funding, infrastructure challenges, and regulatory barriers. So simplifying those regulations, improving the access to funding, and supporting entrepreneurs can create more opportunity and more income mobility. Because when small businesses succeed, they are creating jobs, they are expanding the tax base, and this benefits the entire community, country, right? Another structural issue is that many households effectively pay twice for services, as we've said. So they're paying their taxes, then they're paying privately for things like we've said security, electricity backup, education, healthcare. So improving that efficiency and reliability of public services would reduce the need for households to privately replace those structures. And this would significantly reduce financial pressure on many middle-class households. Imagine you don't have to pay for medical aid. Imagine you don't have to pay to send your kid to a private school. Imagine you don't have to pay for private security. Would that not free up funds so that it can be spent on other things? So what can individuals do in the meantime, right? We've spoken about what the government needs to do, and we don't know whether that will happen or not happen. But what can us as individuals do? Because structural change takes time, but there are also practical strategies that individuals and that families can consider. And now they're obviously not going to solve the entire problem. They're not going to solve most of the problem, but they can help create more financial resilience. So the first thing is focus on financial structure and not just income. One of the biggest misconceptions in personal finance is that financial pressure is only about income, but in reality, it is often about financial structure. So that means looking carefully at your debt levels, at your monthly commitments, at your savings buffers, at your investment strategy. Reducing your high interest debt and building emergency reserves can significantly improve financial stability during these uncertain economic periods. Number two is diversifying your income streams. One trend that we are seeing globally at the moment is the rise of multiple income streams. And this could include things like consulting or freelance work, small side businesses, digital products or services, investments that generate passive income. Relying on a single income source in a slow growth economy can increase financial vulnerability. So diversification can create additional stability over time. Now, number three is investing in skills and adaptability. Economic environments change, industries evolve, technology advances. One of the most valuable assets anyone can invest in is their own skills and adaptability. And this could mean learning new technical skills or improving your financial literacy or understanding emerging industries or developing entrepreneurial thinking. The more adaptable individuals are, the better positioned they are when economic conditions shift. And the fourth thing is strategic financial planning. Now, many households operate without a clear financial plan, but strategic financial planning can help with things like tax efficiency, investment growth, retirement planning, protecting against unexpected shocks. This is where financial education and professional advice can play a very, very important role. Because when economic conditions are uncertain, being clear about your situation is extremely valuable. So the pressure on South Africa's middle class is very real, but understanding the forces behind it is the first step towards responding intelligently. Because while individuals cannot control national economic policy, they can control how they structure their finances, manage risks, develop their skills, and position themselves for opportunities. And over time, those decisions compound. Now, the pressure on South Africa's middle class is not just about personal finance, it is about the structure of the economy itself. But the middle class is what drives economic consumption, entrepreneurship, investment, and tax revenue. So when the middle class grows, economies become more stable. But when it starts to reduce or struggle, then the consequences ripple across the entire system. And that's why conversations about economic growth, about tax policy, about supporting small businesses are so important to South Africa's future, because strengthening that middle class ultimately strengthens the country. If you would like more videos like this, where we break down economic trends, tax changes, and financial strategy in South Africa, then do let me know in the comments. I am obviously going to move on to other topics now, not just economics. But if you like this, you enjoyed this, and you want more of this, please do let me know in the comments. Let me know what's your thoughts on what I said as well throughout this video. I would love to hear it. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and don't forget to share it with somebody who could benefit from this information. We would like for our content to reach more people so that more people become aware of the options that they have and the solutions that are available to them. Here at HM Accounting, our goal is not just to talk about the numbers, but to help people understand how the economy actually affects their lives and their businesses and what they can do about it. Thank you again so much for watching. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.